if you want to take.
Got so quiet.
Gosh, we're frightfully disciplined, but I'm not going to start until 6 p.m. exactly. so carry on conversing. You got about 45 seconds. There we go. Now it's 6 o'clock. Welcome to all of you in the room and also those who are joining us online for this IISS Special Lecture on the theme Managing Strategic Competition and the Quest for an Enduring Future in the Indo-Pacific. Let me thank Raytheon for their support to this event, the Shangri-La Hotel for hosting it, the IISS events team collaborating with Indo-PACOM's team to ensure it works so smoothly. Obviously also to Singapore MINDEF and the government of Singapore for their long-term partnership with the IISS. It was a real delight for me to hear that Admiral Aquilino was going to give this address, and I flew down from London to be able to hear it and engage with him over dinner tonight. I'm also using the excuse of this visit to Singapore to begin our planning for the Shangri-La Dialogue in June 2023, where the invitations are already well launched, and to discuss with the Ministry of Defense an enduring future for the Shangri-La Dialogue well to the end of this decade. The 20th anniversary of the Shangri-La Dialogue is an extraordinary event. When we began it in 2002, and I invited Mr. Lee Kuan Yew to consider the idea that we might organize this event, it was extraordinary to be told then that in 2002 in the Asia-Pacific, as it was then styled, presidents met, foreign ministers met, finance ministers met, but defense ministers never met in groups of greater than two. The fact that we were able successfully to launch it in 2002, and 4 years later an ASEAN defense ministers meeting was first convened, and then a few years after that an ADMM plus meeting was organized, meant that we feel we helped the path of defense diplomacy in this area. We have a combatant commander speaking to us today, and I've been fortunate over my 30 years running the IISS to meet many, and I've concluded in meeting them all that combatant commanders have two qualities that are essential to their success. The first is they must be fine strategists, required to analyze and plan for battle, usually in quite a wide theater of operations, and prepare for a variety of contingencies. The second is that they must be defense diplomats, charged also with engaging at the highest level with civilian and military leaderships in their area of operations with the single goal of helping to prevent conflict. Every week in this region, the Indo-Pacific, there is new news generated. Earlier this week, new Chinese defense minister was appointed. The AUKUS work plan was publicly announced. A step was taken in Japan-Korea reconciliation, perhaps there an example of win-win diplomacy, and Indo-Pacific guidelines are being released by countries of all kinds. The Rubik's Cube of minilateral and multilateral arrangements in the Indo-Pacific is always shifting. And we thought there was no one better to analyze the nature of strategic competition in this area and manage it than Admiral John Aquilino. Admiral, the floor and this podium is yours.
Thanks. Well, good evening, Mr. Ambassador. It's good to see you. Thanks for coming. To the flag officers, distinguished guests, think tank experts, and all those who had nothing better to do tonight, thank you for coming. It's certainly great to be back in Singapore, and I thank my friends here and the government of Singapore for allowing me to come back. And I do want to take a second to congratulate General Melvin Ung, a good friend, who is about to retire and I want to thank him for his many years of dedicated service to his nation and for being a really good partner and friend. I also want to congratulate Admiral Beng, also a good friend, as he continues to serve in uniform as the next CDF here in Singapore. And John, thank you very much. Thanks to IISS. It's wonderful to be here. You bring together an impressive group, and it's always interesting to engage. So I'm honored to be here, and hopefully my comments will lead to additional and more cooperation between Singapore and the United States. So I want to start by making some key points. Just prior to this, we talked about misinformation, disinformation, propaganda, and other things, and there's a lot of it out there. So I thought I would start by removing all doubt for a few key areas. First and foremost, the United States is not seeking conflict in the Indo-Pacific region. Rather, we embrace the rules-based international order, freedom of navigation throughout the global commons, human rights, and the peaceful settlement of disputes utilizing the rule of law. Second, we do not seek to contain the People's Republic of China. As stated in U.S. strategy, however, we are engaged in a robust competition. Third, the United States has not changed our policies toward Taiwan, and we do not support Taiwan independence. We do, however, support peace and prosperity and stability in the Pacific, free of coercion and bullying. So when I look at the environment across this region and across the globe, I believe the world has evolved from an era of globalization in which economies drove geopolitics, and it's changing to an era of renewed great power competition where the security environment influences economics, trade, and investment. But competition doesn't mean no friction, nor does it mean we will acquiesce to every demand. So, the United States is a Pacific nation. We always have been, and we will continue to fly, sail, and operate anywhere international law allows to demonstrate the freedom of navigation rights of all nations. We actively defend these freedoms because the international rules-based order and the rule of law are foundational to peace, stability, and prosperity. Now, no one knew this better than the father of modern Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew. When faced with the daunting task of shaping this country's future, he described the government's approach in this way, and I quote, "Our policies are designed to ensure that we stay peaceful in Southeast Asia, in accord and in amity with our neighbors, but with the right to decide how we order our own lives in our own home. Every action, every policy must be decided by this yardstick," end quote. So, ladies and gentlemen, my concern is that this foundation of the rules-based international order, this right to order our lives as we see fit, is under direct assault by authoritarian regimes. And tonight I'll talk a little bit about what I see and how, alongside our allies and partners and friends, that we will continue to build an enduring future of peace and prosperity for all to benefit in this region and for all nations to contribute. The rules-based international order has delivered greater prosperity, enhanced security, and it strengthens sovereignty of all in the region. It's proven over the last 8 decades. An interconnected global economy has created incredible opportunities, not only for economic growth and not only for the region, but for the world. Now, Singapore is a tremendous example of what can be achieved. Singapore embraces free markets, the rule of law, peaceful and transparent resolution of differences through dialogue, and those efforts have helped quadruple Singapore's GDP over the last 20 years. Now, I used to work for Admiral Harris. He had a picture in his command brief, and it had a picture of Singapore in the vicinity of the Singapore River in 1965. And then right next to it, it had a picture of Singapore in 2020. And you wouldn't believe it was the same place. That's what right can look like. So, with one of the world's finest airports, the world's second largest port, a free and open Indo-Pacific is a matter of vital national importance to Singapore and to the rest of the nations in the region. So, it's more than economics. It's also security. The rules-based order is supportive of the security interests of all. Peaceful resolution to disputes, in accordance with the rule of law, ensures all nations have an equal voice in an open and transparent manner in order to help avoid conflict. ASEAN's alignment behind the confirmation that the 1982 UNCLOS Treaty is the basis for the interpretation of international maritime law. Incredibly powerful from the ASEAN nations. International rules-based order also strengthens sovereignty. Sovereign nations must remain free to choose their own security partners, negotiate trade agreements, and they must do it without the fear of coercion or intimidation. Sovereignty demands each country, regardless of size, has an equal voice and ensured access to the global commons. So, U.S. operations throughout the region are executed in accordance with international law, and they uphold the navigational rights and freedoms of all nations, large or small. So we take these actions because the international rules-based order is at risk for global destabilization. Revisionist powers seek to disrupt and displace the current system in ways that benefit themselves and at the expense of all others. They use coercion, intimidation to achieve their objectives, and they justify their actions under a theory of might equals right. Or they make illegal, excessive territorial claims, not based on anything other than revisionist history. They empower law enforcement entities to harass nations operating legally within their own exclusive economic zones. They break formal commitments. They ignore international legal rulings, and they avoid requirements delivered under the UN Charter. Some have even proposed alternative security options. And while on the face they look benign, their real purpose is to establish an alternative to this rules-based order in ways that benefit one nation and at the expense of all others. Now, these actions isolate them on the world stage, and we, as witness to these actions, must always focus on deeds and not words. Actions are what matter. And how we contend with the affront to the rules-based international order, it impacts all nations in this region and out. Now, I'm encouraged that many like-minded nations throughout the region have embraced a vision of a free and open Indo-Pacific. And it's critically important that the global set of allies, partners, and friends continue to work together to support this common values. Now, the mechanism, as directed by my Secretary of Defense to me, is through the execution of integrated deterrence. And as defined, integrated deterrence is the synchronization of all forms of national power in all domains with the joint force and in coordination with our allies and partners to prevent conflict. So, what you'll see U.S. Indo-PACOM doing with our allies and partners in the military sphere, we execute 120 exercises a year. Singapore and the United States partnering to conduct sophisticated high-end training on platforms like the F-16 and F-35. 25 nations, 25,000 personnel, to include many ASEAN nations and around the globe, executing the Rim of the Pacific exercise in Hawaii. Exercise Cope North, which is ongoing today. Aircraft from Singapore, Thailand, and the United States operating together in a way that support regional security objectives. These exercises increase capability, they improve interoperability, and they strengthen trust between the partners. And when viewed by those who seek to change the rules-based order, these activities provide clear, visible evidence of our commitment to preserving peace and stability in this region. Now, it all can't be done militarily. Diplomatically, advancements and partnerships with Australia, Japan, Philippines, all increase our strength of our position in the region. The trilateral relationship between the Republic of Korea, Japan, and the United States provides dedicated capability to defend all of our homelands. The Quad nations exercising together highlight the importance of the Indian Ocean as it applies to the global community. And ASEAN, once again, ASEAN centrality is critical and cannot be overstated in importance as we balance the force throughout the Indo-Pacific region. There's legal and legislative actions that support integrated deterrence. The CHIPS and Science Act, passed to protect critical technologies and strengthen property protection, intellectual property protections for national security. Our intelligence sharing and cooperation delivers a deterrent effect. Sharing of intelligence across the region to provide maritime domain awareness for all of our partners increases their understanding of the battle space. The Counterterrorism Information Facility, based right here in Singapore, brings together our like-minded nations to use open source information to prevent terrorist attacks for all of our like-minded partners. 6 ASEAN nations, Australia, New Zealand, and the United States, participate. And all are welcome. To coordinate, collaborate, and cooperate, U.S. Indo-Pacific Command is delivering what is we refer to as the mission partner environment. A single system for all like-minded partners to be able to communicate, collaborate, and operate together across all domains. And then finally, economically. We're making historic investments in the United States to build on our continued growth and resiliency. It includes working with our allies and partners, to include Singapore, to write the rules for a 21st century economy that will help all of our countries' economies grow faster. And through the use of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity, we're seeking high ambition outcomes with Singapore and 12 other nations. It fosters inclusive economic growth, resilient supply chains, and the necessary investment to support these objectives. So, credible deterrence incorporates all forms of national power. Now, I'll say it again. The United States does not seek to contain China, but we will compete. And by competing, we will demonstrate the superiority of the current rules-based international order that provides all nations the opportunity to reach their full potential. Now, the challenges to this international order are urgent, and they're a problem today for all of us. Although I believe conflict is neither imminent nor inevitable, in my role, it doesn't matter. U.S. Indo-PACOM are taking actions every day to prevent any potential conflict. Now, ultimately, great nations lead towards a compelling vision of the future. And for many decades, the United States and Singapore have cultivated a close relationship. It's anchored in our respect for each other, our people-to-people ties, the respect for the rules order, the appreciation of free markets, and adherence to the international law. So, as we figure out how to go forward together, there's really one question we should ask ourselves, and that is, what kind of world would we like to leave our children and grandchildren? And you could roll it up into two options. We could leave a world that suffers from a tradition of tyranny, or we could leave one that flourishes with a legacy of liberty that includes a free and open Indo-Pacific. Once again, I thank you for your attention. It's always great to be back here. I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Admiral. We'll now move to a period of Q&A, and I'll call on questions in the room and also from online. I've got at least one here I'd certainly like to draw on. Let me ask the first question, Admiral. We've witnessed an interesting technique of U.S. strategic diplomacy in the run-up to the Ukraine war, when it was increasingly evident to the NSA and their partners at GCHQ in the UK that this build-up of forces on the Ukraine border was an indication of actual Putin intent to invade Ukraine. And the United States, with the United Kingdom, began releasing an awful lot of intelligence to its allies and partners. To some, it was perhaps a little dispiriting that major European powers believed Putin's statement that he had no intention to invade over that of their principal allies that showed exquisite intelligence to that effect. But the quality of US intelligence was shown to be extremely high in this instance, and while deterrence failed, I looked at that and thought, this is a new instrument of diplomacy. It's deterrence by preemptive attribution. It's saying, we know you're going to do this, and we're attributing this intent to you, hoping that perhaps that intent would not be realized. With your like-minded partners in this region, do you think that deterrence by preemptive attribution in any of the domains, including possibly cyber, is a useful way to maintain peace and security, perhaps also in this region?
Yeah, thanks, John. So having been to the Top Gun school, I'll give you the answer that they always give. It depends. I don't think there's a one cookie-cutter approach. What I would say is the approach that General Cavoli used along with the United States to release and declassify some information was truly based on the relationships with our allies and partners, right? You just don't share for sharing's sake. You share to build trust and to give a common view of the battle space and to describe what could happen, right? I don't think anyone really had the ability of understanding 100% what was going to happen other than one man. That said, what it did do is bring the allies and partners together. It showed a level of trust. It provided an insight that they wouldn't have had without our cooperation, and I think it made NATO stronger. And it ultimately provided options, certainly for General Cavoli to present to the Secretary and the President, and probably for all of the nation's leadership to be able to describe and have conversations with their political leadership. So it was extremely effective in that case. I won't do hypotheticals. It's certainly a tool that's in the toolkit, but there are many other options that we could use.
Thank you very much. And I'll take a question from the online group, because they often feel disenfranchised if they're not in the room. So I'll go first to them. This one is from Shashank Joshi, who's the defense editor of The Economist. It's typically a very precise question. I will have to read it. It's hard to memorize. 3 sentences. The AUKUS announcements made this week include details of Submarine Rotational Force West, including up to 4 US SSNs and 1 UK SSN. Can Admiral Aquilino give us more detail of whether this will include SSNs currently based in Guam, or will it result in a net increase in SSNs in the Indo-Pacific? Additionally, can he explain how long each rotation through HMAS Sterling is likely to last? It is hard to judge the importance of the new posture without a sense of these 2 things. Thank you, he says.
Okay, no. So the details are not quite fleshed out. I think the focus here is to move at the fastest pace possible to deliver the capability that Australia has identified is needed. Again, under the structure of allies and partners, the United Kingdom, the United States has chosen to share some of our highest technology with Australia in order to ensure that Australia, a treaty ally of the United States, can defend itself. The concern for the friction in the region is alarming to all and trending in the wrong direction. So the Australians have made a choice. As good partners, the United States and the United Kingdom will go ahead and assist in the ability for Australia to defend themselves. All those details will be worked out, but we are intending to move as fast as possible and as safe as possible.
Thank you very much. So we're in the room now. Lynn Kwok, who's with the ISS. If you stand up, the microphone will migrate at speed towards you, and you can self-identify yourself as Senior Fellow at the IISS ISS Asia. Now you don't have to, because I have. Go ahead.
Thank you, John, for making my task so easy, and thank you, Admiral. Your predecessor said in 2021 that China could have as one of its Taiwan as one of its ambitions in the next 6 years, so by 2027. He didn't make the basis for his assessment clear. You were reported as disagreeing with him, and you stated that the problem is much closer to us than most think, and we have to take this on. Could you please explain to us, first, what time frame you are looking at, second, the basis for your assessment, and third, whether your assessment looks at China's military capabilities or its actual intent to invade Taiwan, or do you see this as one and the same thing, namely that if China has the military capabilities, that it will invade Taiwan? Thank you.
Well, thank you. First, let me just start by saying I did not disagree with Admiral Davidson, right? And what Admiral Davidson stated was that President Xi tasked his military structure to deliver the capabilities that would be needed by 2027. That's the date that it was based on. That's just a fact. It's what was tasked by the President of China to his military forces. So, I don't disagree with that because that's what he said. Now, everybody wants to talk timelines, and if I knew what the timeline was, I wouldn't be sitting here with John. I'd be in Las Vegas. But what I will tell you is, when I say it doesn't matter, it certainly doesn't matter to me because the missions that the Secretary has given me is to take all actions required through the lens of integrated deterrence to prevent conflict. Now, he gave me a second mission, which says if deterrence fails, then you need to be prepared to fight and win. And he gave me that mission when I took over in 21. He didn't tell me I could do it in 28 or 29. He told me to do it today. So we're taking all of our actions. We're operating in the theater. We're coordinating and delivering deterrent effects with our allies and partners today and every day through this lens of operating every day in the region to prevent conflict.
Thank you. Here, anyone else? I can ask a question if no one else. There's someone right in the back. The person who's just raised their hand, if you stand and identify yourself, thank you very much. Perfect. Thank you.
Oh, hi. Thank you. Thank you very much for your speech, Admiral.
Can you just identify yourself? Sorry.
Sure. I'm just getting to that part. My name's Emma Connors, and I'm a journalist for the Australian Financial Review. I was just hoping you could give us some insight into the current communication channels in place between you and your other senior military and diplomatic leaders in the US and your counterparts in the PRC. I mean, we've heard a lot about escalation. We've heard a lot about increased activity by these two growing navies in the region. You would think that would increase the risk of accidental collision and escalation. And I'm just wondering, are you satisfied with the guardrails that are now in place to prevent what many worry about in this region, which is the prospect of an accidental war? Thank you.
No. You guys are making this too easy. So let me expound a little. When I took over the position, within 2 months of taking over, Indo-PACOM hosted our annual Chiefs of Defense Conference, and we were able to do it in person in a post-COVID environment, and we did it in Hawaii. At that event, many of my partners came over and said, hey, you really need to engage and develop an ability to communicate with A, all of us, and B, with the People's Republic of China leadership. So I value the counsel of my partners, and for now going on just over a year and a half, I have a standing request to be able to speak to either the Eastern or the Southern Theater Commander from the PRC. Secretary Austin, just a couple of months ago, met with Minister Wei, and they both agreed that we should talk. The operational commanders should have a conversation. I have not yet received a response for a year and a half to accept my request for a conversation. I haven't received a no. I haven't received a wait, could we adjust? I've just received no answer. Now, we continue to ask because I do think it's important, but it's concerning to me that I don't have the ability to talk to someone should there be a reason to talk. Again, with the rest of the nations in the region and with many nations out of the region, we speak often. I'm on their speed dial and they're on mine. And whenever there's an event, whether it's be response to a earthquake, a flood, you name a natural disaster in this region, I have the ability to quickly write or call them, and they have the ability to quickly write or call me to ask for help. And I'm hoping to have that same option with the PRC. But today it doesn't exist. And it's not from a lack of trying from this part.
Thank you. Anyone? Yes, you, sir, please. If you could stand, just only for the purposes of the microphone coming quicker to you, and give us your name and affiliation if at all relevant. Thank you.
Thank you, Admiral, for a great talk. Sarang Shidore, Quincy Institute, Washington, D.C. Question I have for you, Admiral, is do you accept the possibility that adding deterrence at some point becomes self-defeating in that the deterrence has an impact of a response that may actually reduce US security? And if so, are we close to that line or point, or are we quite far from that, in your judgment? Thank you.
I don't think I prescribe to your context, and the reason I don't is, 80 years we've been operating here. So when you talk about deterrence activities, right, they're similar and/or adjusted based on what we've been doing for decades. So if all of a sudden we're doing the same thing and we think it's going to kick off a war, I would question the interpretation of the deterrent activities. We assess all of our actions and missions through risk to mission, risk to force, and risk to escalation. I'm confident that our actions in the region are aligned with what we've been doing and have done for 80 years. I'm confident, based on my initial comment that says we do not seek conflict. We are not taking actions to provoke. We are taking actions to prevent. So that's how I would answer your question.
Thanks. I've got a couple online here, which again I'll read for precision. They're shorter than the first, but precise. Mike Yo, who's with Defense News, says, I have recently reported on the presence of a U.S. Air Force Global Hawk surveillance unmanned aircraft operating from Changi Air Base in Singapore. Would you be able to comment and provide more details about what it was doing here?
No. Actually, I will comment. So, again, as always, right, there was a requirement and in very short coordination with our Singapore counterparts and with great respect and in alignment with our partnership, they allowed the airplane to be able to land here, recover. It has since departed. But again, the question, I think, is not representative of the real issue. The real issue is the close partnership, the ability to coordinate quickly, to understand each other's operations, and to support each other whenever it's needed.
And we've got a question from France here, which is more open-ended than the previous one. Admiral, what do you expect, or what would you like to see coming from Europeans to support the action of the United States and its regional allies? One, to deter conflict with China today, and two, to support the US if there were a conflict tomorrow.
What would I like to see from our partners?
What would you like to see from your European allies in support of the effort to deter conflict today and to support the US if there were a conflict with China in the future? It's from Jérémy Bachelier, the military fellow in IFRI in France. So
yeah, thanks. So from our French counterparts, when I get those questions, I apologize I didn't hear, but based on their Pacific presence in Tahiti, I didn't realize the question was from a Europe side. But the message that I have sent through General Cavoli into our European partners across all of that region is, number one, to understand the importance of the Indo-Pacific globally. 2/3 of the global commerce transits through this region and to Europe. The importance and the impact of globalization and what it might mean to Europe if there was a disruption of the flow of goods and services would be extremely impactful and not in a good way. So understanding that importance, that's point one. Point two, I invite all my partners to come to this theater and deploy with us. I thank the French. The Tonnerre has been here. Jeanne d'Arc and a few of their other ships. They've sent a submarine here not long ago, and they sent some aircraft that flew almost around the world to do a Pacific detachment, of which the United States, along with our other partners, supported the logistics for those events to make their deployments successful. Again, that's what partners do for each other. So I invite all of our European allies, partners, and friends to come to Pacific, operate with us, join into our exercises, understand the theater better, and continue to build relationships with our partners in the Indo-Pacific.
I know that our friends in France would have appreciated that you noted that France is a resident power in the Indo-Pacific. It's a point they like making. It was a point that the US often makes, and I think that will have been appreciated in Paris. Yes, Kisho Mabubane. Everybody recognizes you, but you can stand anyway. So over to you.
Thank you, John. Admiral, you said many things today that were very reassuring to Singapore and to the region, that the United States is not pursuing a containment policy, the United States doesn't support the independence of Taiwan, and you also emphasize ASEAN centrality. So what I want to build on is your last comment on ASEAN centrality, because as you know, the ASEAN countries deeply, deeply appreciate the presence of the United States here in all its forms, military, economic, political, and of course they want to preserve their good relations with the United States. But at the same time, China is also, as you know, our neighbor for the past 2,000 years, next 2,000 years, and they also want to maintain good relations with China. So what they would like to see is a very careful, well-balanced competition, where the competition carries on, but not in a way that forces the ASEAN countries to make zero-sum decisions. So they would appreciate a certain degree of sensitivity and understanding of this ASEAN nuance. And do you think that is being appreciated in Washington, D.C.? And are there efforts being made to ensure that the ASEAN countries also feel comfortable as the competition carries on, as it will?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of examples of exactly what you described with regard to Washington, D.C. First, the president hosted ASEAN nations in the White House to certainly understand and highlight the importance of ASEAN in the region, number one. Number two, the secretary always articulates, as do I, and it's U.S. policy, the United States is not asking any nation to choose one or the other. There's no strings attached. There's no pressure to say, you know, you must choose the United States. Secondly, there's a place for China in this world. The point that I think is important is the following and adherence to the rules-based order, as all of the nations here interpret it, is important. Open markets, transparency, freedom of navigation, the peaceful settlement of disputes, the rule of law, human rights, those are things that are important to everyone. So there's a place for China in this world to adhere and follow the rules like all the rest of us do. But ASEAN's clear importance in the region, they speak with one voice. It's a very powerful voice. It's representative of what's important here. And again, I value every one of my engagements with my partners in ASEAN. So I hope that gets to your question.
There are about 5 or 6 questions here online that basically all go to the same question, so I'll paraphrase it. The question is, there's a hot war in Europe now. Russia's invaded the biggest country in Europe. What are the lessons that you think the United States is drawing from the war in Europe for the Indo-Pacific theater, and what do you think the lessons are that China is drawing from the same conflict for this Indo-Pacific theater?
Well, there's some differences, but let me just talk about the ones that are the same, that both nations are learning. Number one, the ability to execute complex combined arms actions to achieve your objectives is difficult. Synchronizing all those effects, all those domains, supporting it through logistics chains to deliver an effective fighting force that can sustain over time is hard. And you can ask one man in Moscow how hard it is. Second, it costs blood. And I don't think there's anything that looks like a short war anymore, if there ever was. But the investment of the blood of the people of your nation, a choice to take that action, should never be taken lightly. And whatever you think the cost will be, it will far exceed what you think. Next, it's going to cost your nation treasure. So, are you willing to invest the future of your nation as it applies to economic prosperity for the people of your nation? I think those are kind of the key ones, and I think there's a lot of nations that have learned or either learned or relearned that lesson.
Going back to my phrase about how the Rubik's Cube is moving, there's been quite an important change in the last several months in the strategic posture of the Philippines under the Marcos administration. Not only have they tightened up the strategic diplomatic security relationship with the United States, not only have they carried on to create an ever stronger one with Australia, but so far as I understand, they are trying within the bounds of their own constitution and the bounds of the Japanese constitution, perhaps to arrange a visiting forces agreement with Japan. Were that to be concluded, the sort of maritime surveillance capacities in the South China Sea linking Japan, the Philippines, and Australia would be relatively unified. Do you see a role as the Indo-Pacific commander in encouraging this sort of cooperation, and what do you think the security promise would be of that sort of arrangement?
So I think the key here is, as we talk about the current structure and architecture, all nations get to make a choice who they want to partner with. Those are sovereign rights that independent nations get to make. I encourage all of our partners to come and operate together, be more interoperable. Let's train, practice, and like I said before, we're taking all comers. No exclusions. So if the Philippines decide that they believe they need a stronger relationship with the Japanese, we're very supportive of that. I hope they would invite us in to participate in some of their exercises. I think the real theme is what you're seeing as it applies to the architecture in the Pacific is a lot of nations that are concerned about their security. Now, you got to ask yourself, why is that? So, you could take a look at the actions that have been demonstrated throughout the region, whether it be pressurization from fishing fleets, laser operations, economic coercion, and other actions. That's what's driving nations to be concerned for their security and to reach out and develop more partnerships, because we are stronger when we're together. When the like-minded nations come together, like I said, it delivers a deterrent effect that can absolutely prevent conflict.
Thanks very much. We've got time for 3 or 4 more questions. Aaron Connolly, if you stand, you're the Senior Fellow for Southeast Asia at the IISS Asia office.
Thanks, Dr. Chipman. Admiral, I'm curious, there seems to be a big push under the Biden administration for the U.S. Coast Guard to play a bigger role in this region. Coast Guard's pretty thinly stretched, and I'm just wondering what you see as the advantages of having Coast Guard in this region as opposed to having some more gray holes in this region. Thanks.
So when we talk about operations in the theater, it usually revolves around this theme, right? The right force for the right mission in the right place at the right time. And in many cases, the Coast Guard is absolutely the right force. So when you talk about the support and enforcement of IUU fishing issues, and the overfishing inside of exclusive economic zones of some nations, the pressurization there, the Coast Guard's absolutely the right force. The Coast Guard also understands the importance of the Pacific, and you're going to see more Coast Guard in the Pacific. The United States Navy, in some cases, can overwhelm. In some cases, some of the places don't even have a military, but they do have a Coast Guard. So to pull all that together, and my Coast Guard partner in support, again, he doesn't work for me, but we coordinate and operate together to achieve the objectives of our nation. And it's a really great team. So I am looking for more Coast Guard. And as the Coast Guard balances across their global commitments, anything additional that they can provide to the Pacific, we certainly have use for.
Thank you very much. And James Crabtree, Executive Director at IISS Asia, in the front row.
Thank you very much, John. Admiral Aquilino, you've given a frank introduction to your speech today, your initial 3 points. The United States does not seek conflict, down to it doesn't support independence with Taiwan. That suggests to me that sort of something has gone wrong, that you have to come here and push back against these 3 points. So what do you think has gone wrong? Why is it that this perception is out there in the region that you have to push back against? And on the third point, if you don't support independence for Taiwan, what more do you think the United States needs to do to support the defense of Taiwan?
So I wouldn't categorize it as pushing back. What I would say is the role of the information environment in this day and age can be confusing, such that people could make wrong interpretations, or people could articulate things in a way that could give you the wrong perception. And that effort is going on. 3 days ago, the foreign minister of the PRC, in the wake of the closing of the 20th Party Congress, articulated that war with the United States is inevitable. And it's important for me to ensure that my partners and the PRC knows that the United States is not pursuing conflict. So I think it's about truthful messaging at the right place so that it can't be interpreted any other way. And that's the message that I tell my partners, and you can ask any of the chiefs of defense here, because I remind them every time we talk. They see it in my words, they see it in our actions. We've been operating with the nations out here for 80 years, and they know what we do, they know how we do it. So what you have is the words match the actions, right? I talked in the speech about deeds and not words. And it's important for me for our deeds to match our words. So I think that's really why I'd hit on it.
I think I'm right in saying, I hope you won't say no to this, that the Indo-Pacific command of all the US combatant commands is the geographically largest in the territories and seas that it covers. It certainly probably also has the most independent states within it. We've talked a lot about the big states, the middle states, the ASEAN states. I'd like to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about the smaller Pacific Island states who have a whole series of security concerns, not all of them adequately attended to. And I wonder what you think your command, with all the wide responsibilities and deep responsibilities it has, can do to promote peace and security, particularly amongst and between and within the Pacific Island states.
Yeah, so first of all the nations in the region are important, right? And again, I make this point of clearly stating it doesn't matter whether your nation is big or small. We support and fight for the right for all nations to have an equal voice, no matter what. The Pacific Islands are a pretty good example. We've recently seen in the form of the Solomon Islands some actions by the PRC to potentially grab a foothold. I think it woke a number of us up to ensure that we spend more time, engage with, provide assistance, and support the Pacific Islands. And through the leadership of Australia, New Zealand, and the other nations in the southern part of the hemisphere there, they certainly have taken an increased leadership role. We coordinate our support. The United States provides a number of efforts, port visits, Coast Guard visits to support IUU fishing rights for those nations. Our Pacific Partnership exercises brings medical attention, help, and care to the Pacific Islands every year. So they're important. We're back on track, I would say, and we continue to engage in ways that are meaningful and helpful for those nations.
Next, we can go to about 1 minute to 7. Do I see anyone? I can keep on going for a couple of minutes, but I would. There you go, sir. Up you stand. Thank
Admiral, Commander Mattsson, Swedish DA. I think there is another spot of interest in your area of responsibility, DPRK, North Korea. Would you mind sharing a few thoughts on the situation there and how that affects your planning and operations?
Certainly. So last year, the DPRK executed 70 launches, the most in its history of provocative actions. Those actions are destabilizing to the region. They threaten the Republic of Korea. They threaten Japan. They have developed the capabilities to threaten the United States as well. So that alliance is important. Launched an intercontinental ballistic missile this morning. That's how I started my day. That said, we continually coordinate. My partner with General Lakamera at U.S. Forces Korea and his counterpart, General Kim, from the Republic of Korea, they were on the phone. This morning I spoke with General Yamazaki as we coordinate A, what we saw, and B, what we might recommend doing. But ultimately, it's destabilizing, it's unpredictable, it's continuing, it's not slowing down, and the potential for the People's Republic of China to help dissuade the DPRK from executing these events would be helpful.
So I will ask another question, but a very different one on AUKUS. There was this very comprehensive statement the other day by the three leaders on what the plans were for the submarine sales that are multiple and of two different types. But there hasn't yet been that much public discussion about the second really important pillar of the AUKUS arrangements, which were about AI, quantum, cyber, undersea capacities. When I speak to people in industry about this, whether in the UK or Australia, and to a degree also in the United States, they say one of the difficulties in advancing on this pillar is that despite the fact that on the other pillar, one is sharing one of the most sensitive technologies imaginable, which is nuclear propulsion, there isn't yet the sort of mini ITAR arrangement that would permit the sharing of AI, quantum, cyber, and other capacities at speed yet. What do you think needs to be done so that that pillar of the AUKUS arrangement is built to the same height and with the same effect as the other one?
Yeah, thanks, John. So our partners have articulated ITAR in many cases can be tricky to work through. And when you share the highest levels of technology, you can expect it can even be more tricky. That said, we will figure this out, right? So the Pillar 2 aspect, separate from submarines, I sat not long ago with Admiral Ratikin and General Campbell, and we laid out an approach for what we want to execute in Pillar 2. And number one, that's to deliver warfighting capability as fast as possible. So if you were to think about binning capabilities in the near, mid, and far term, and then focusing our efforts to deliver a warfighting advantage, that's the approach for Pillar 2. So some of them may be longer term, but there are certainly some things that we're going to deliver in the real near term.
Super. Yes, you, sir. Someone will have to jog. Right, he's standing. Microphone over here, please. Yeah, it's coming to stage left to you. There you go.
Hello, Admiral. I'm Bert Hoffman. I work at the East Asian Institute at the National University. And thank you for sharing your thoughts. You mentioned this issue of containment, that you are not here to contain China. And I do not know anything about the military, but Jake Sullivan last year said the following: given the foundational nature of certain technologies, such as advanced logic and memory chip, we must maintain as large a lead as possible. In other words, the past was the sliding scale when China could catch up. Now we must keep it as far as possible behind. Is there a technological containment of China?
Thank you.
No. There's competition. Many nations in the world are going after some of the most promising sets of technology, whether it be for military use, commercial use. That's just the way the world is. So again, I think what I heard you say is the National Security Advisor was describing what competition looks like for him. And again, across all areas, economic, diplomatic, military, technology.
Admiral Aquilino, you have honored us at the IISS, the Republic of Singapore, by choosing this place to give these very important sets of remarks, this special lecture at the IISS. I want to ask everyone in this room to do two things. First, stay seated for the next 90 seconds as we take a photograph here and escort Admiral Aquilino to his next engagement. But even more importantly, before any of that, could you please thank Admiral Aquilino for his address?